Many across West Texas are working to keep their culture alive.
West Texas is not separated from the rest of the world.
We have to be committed, and this commitment goes beyond a dollar amount.
During the entire month of February, African Americans across the basin have been taking a look back.
We're trying to do this to show what our ancestors and them did back in the day for us to have freedom today.
They taught us an awful lot because they were getting us ready for the world out there that we really had not been able to be in.
2020's theme, African Americans and the vote.
Looking back 100 years ago at the passage of the 19th Amendment.
I tell people that if you want to make change, you have to be the change.
So thank you for joining us as we celebrate the legacy of African Americans.
With a look at hidden history, honoring Black history.
This is a Big 2 News special presentation. West Texas Hidden History, honoring Black history.
Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us as we celebrate Black History Month. I'm Monica Quintero.
And I'm Jocelyn Person. We spent all month out in the community to see how you at home are celebrating.
A prominent Odessa woman is looking back on how things have changed in the city since she first arrived.
Our Jake Eistat sat down to talk with her about the changes at schools in particular.
She's currently the Ector County Treasurer and has been a staple in the office for more than 2 decades. Cleopatra Calloway talked with us about how the choices her parents made got her to where she is today. Before coming to the Permian Basin, her parents were cotton farmers in Sylvester, Texas.
The farming industry had gone down, so my parents decided to board the pipeline. When he came into Odessa, they found that there was a school, Blackshear High School, that extended to the 12th grade, that the colored, Negro, African American children could attend.
That was back in the 1930s. Blackshear High School opened in 1932 and closed in 1966 after the nationwide integration of schools.
Then my dad was able to obtain a job with the Ector County Independent School District there at Blackshear as a custodian. And with him having the keys to the building, he was a very important person. And here we look at 60 years later, I'm the custodian of Ector County funds.
Cleopatra Calloway has been elected twice now as the Ector County Treasurer.
This is Rosie Parks, and also we have Shirley Chisholm, and we have the first Congress, Black First Congress.
In her office, you'll find pictures of her heroes, people who came before her who stood up to make a difference. That, along with her faith, keeps her inspired.
We still have a long way to go, but with the effort of everyone, not only blacks, but every race, if we will look each other with respect, we can make a change.
After Blackshear High School was closed, it was turned into a junior high. Today, the doors are still open as an ECISD elementary school.
We also introduce you to a man who recently got promoted to a fire captain. Meet Gerald Fletcher. He's the only male African American in the Odessa Fire and Rescue. He became a captain back in October. What may surprise you, he didn't enter this career until he was 35 years old. He's now been doing it for 16 and a half years. Captain Fletcher wants to inspire others that no matter your race or age, go for your dreams.
It's never too late. If you want to go after it, then just go after it. Just put in the hard work and you can definitely do it. That's what I did.
His advice is simple. Treat everyone the way you want to be treated.
We have numerous Black leaders here in the Permian Basin working to make a difference. Among them, 2 people on the Odessa City Council and a woman who's worked for the city for 4 decades. From the civil rights movement,
we have difficult days ahead in the struggle for justice and peace,
to an African American becoming the President of the United States,
I'm here to insist that we are not as divided as we seem.
African Americans have been making reforms for decades.
We are a big melting pot of individuals coming from different countries.
The city of Odessa, though marred in history, has seen major steps over the last 20 years. The city boasts 2 African-American city council members and a woman who is among the longest tenured in the city. Their goals to continue to make the Permian Basin a better place for everyone to live.
I believe that to whom much is given, much is required.
It gives you an opportunity to have your finger on the pulse of the community.
Malcolm Hamilton has been on the Odessa City Council for 3.5 years. He wants to focus on rejuvenating the Permian Basin with business booming for every race.
Return it at least to its prior state, where there were all kinds of minority businesses flowing throughout the neighborhood.
Mayor Willis has been on the council for about a year. As a retired teacher, she has seen firsthand that things can still get better.
We still have a long way to go because there are still changes that need to happen.
And we can't forget Darlene Mays. The Code Enforcement Education Administrator has worked for the city for almost 41 years. Making her one of the most familiar faces. And over the years, she learned one big thing: to not just listen, but hear the other side.
Discuss, and make things happen.
They all hope to make life better for future generations. When I asked them what stands out about their culture, they cited their faith and family.
The secret to being successful is hard work. It's that simple, says Natasha Brooks. She's the first female African-American city attorney in Odessa. While she's proud of her heritage and wants to inspire others, Brooks hopes people will look past her skin tone.
I think sometimes we get too caught up in race. Why can't we just be Americans?
Brooks is still fairly new to the position. She was named the city attorney in August of last year.
In the early 1900s, black fraternities and sororities were created to provide brotherhood and sisterhood for blacks attending college. The reason for that, they were not welcome in other Greek organizations. We spoke with Paula Wilburn. She's the president of the Odessa Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. It was founded back in 1913. Its motto, intelligence is the torch of wisdom.
As you know, the history of our country, many times the African Americans were left out. As a result, the women wanted to get together and do something to advance the African American community and to enhance it as well as develop it.
Wilburn says the sorority spends a lot of time giving back and is based on Christian values.
Schools were mandated to be desegregated in 1954, but in Midland, officials waiting nearly 30 years to desegregate.
We sat down with a former Carver student and her husband who lived through the changes in schools.
We walked to school together. We had classes together. We had band. There was choir. There were students going to break and to lunch, going from class to class. Just an ordinary day for ordinary students who grew up together in the community. We loved our teachers. We had the utmost respect for them, and they taught us an awful lot. They taught us to respect our elders. They taught us that we needed to certainly do all of our homework, that we needed to listen to everything they told us because they were getting us ready for the world out there that we really had not been able to be in.
A world Robin Fuller says many didn't venture out to go to school with other ethnicities, but for Fuller, she was ready to go into a world many of her teachers prepared her and others for.
So when I married and moved to Lubbock, then that was the first time that I had been able to work outside of my community. The last job that I had when I was in Midland was I became the first African American woman to sell real estate in the Midland community, and I began to sell property outside of our community, over on the other side of town, and that was when I began to venture out of the across the track, as you might say.
I came over here as a young boy with my family. We had friends who lived in Midland, African American friends, and I was able to see the obvious. Black school, black participation, but there is one thing that we will never, I think, regain, and I saw it in Midland, I saw it in San Angelo. The community was a very close-knit group, the African American community. Ironically, segregation contributed to that unity, to that participation, to that ethnic recognition that we were somebody and we were capable of doing great things.
1982 is when both Midland and Odessa officially desegregated, and the Fullers say during the times of segregation and desegregation, the African American community pushed and fought for more.
Segregation pushed schools like Blackshear in San Angelo, Blackshear in Odessa, Carver in Midland, Carter G. Woodson in Abilene, and the list goes on, to do excellent work, to be persistent, to persevere when people said, no, you can't do it. And that's basically the message. On a daily basis, when we went to school, we were reminded, both in Midland and all these other places that I just cited, you can achieve. You go in there and you do your very best.
What I want people to remember is to not repeat the history. When you don't know your history, you're sometimes doomed to repeat it. Just because segregation was then and it is not now, it is in some degree still in this country.
Ector County ISD desegregated in 1966, 16 years after it was originally mandated.
Stay tuned. After the break, we take a look at the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. in the Basin. That's coming up next.
A dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Martin Luther King Jr., a man known to many as an inspiration.
He was honored right here in the Basin this January, and our Jian Kim has a look at his legacy.
The time is always right to do what is right. Infamous words spoken by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the minister and activist enrolled in college at only 15. After the Montgomery bus boycott, he sat in the national spotlight. Today, people across the world celebrate his legacy on January 20th, a day honored with his name. Here's a look at Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day 2020. Dozens of people, as well as our four-legged friends, gathered at the Southside Senior Citizen Center Monday morning.
Come and join us.
there, a rally kicking off the day's events leading into the annual Freedom March.
We're trying to do this to show what our ancestors and them did back in the day for us to have freedom today.
Black Cultural Council of Odessa's committee member Alfred Littleton says,
West Texas is not separated from the rest of the world, and discrimination is a problem. Will always be a problem until we make changes in our life.
And this annual tribute to Martin Luther King Jr.
We've got to keep it going. This year, next year, every year. We'll keep it going until there's no more discrimination.
In the crowd, Kendrick Wright, thanking Dr. King for the legacy he left behind.
I'm very grateful for it, so I can, go to McDonald's and just sit down and eat in a public place, and I don't take it for granted.
And for KJ Lewis,
my mom and dad used to tell me about his story, so I just wish I was born in that time so I could really see the impact he had.
marching is his way of supporting the movement.
We all a family out here, really. That's really what it's about, family.
Martin Luther King Jr. organized the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, an event that more than 200,000 people attended. On the steps on the Lincoln Memorial, King mounted his infamous "I Have a Dream" speech. In 1968, the Reverend traveled to Memphis, Tennessee to support a workers' strike. He was fatally shot while standing on the balcony of his motel. However, as you saw, his legacy lives on. As Martin Luther King Jr. said, "We must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope."
Thanks, Gian, for that report. Martin Luther King Jr. Day is honored all across the Permian Basin.
For an inside look at some of the other celebrations, visit yourbasin.com.
My dream is to continue to be an advocate.
Hear from the president of the NAACP of the local chapter.
Hear why he says the civil rights organization is critical for our community. One Odessa businesswoman has had her fashion clothing store for years. Life experiences sparked her desire to open up her own business and get into fashion.
I just feel elated to have a shop like this where I can reach the Black people, Hispanic people, white people, anybody that want to come by here. But you asked me about Black history though. I am historical.
Walking into Mary's Fashion, you can sense the vintage style that hasn't gone out of style, but you may be wondering how Mary began her business.
Started about 1994 in my house. I started out selling hats, church hats for women. And some of the women came by because they liked them, because they said, they look like Kentucky Derby hats also. So Miss Mary's been in business a long time here in Odessa. I started on the south side of town and ended up here on the north side of town. But I've been in business almost, 20 years. And everybody likes to come by Mary's Fashions. Men and women. I dress men, women, boys, and girls.
But every dream comes from an inspiration, and for Mary Henson, her inspiration was someone very close.
With 9 kids, 9 siblings, my mother dressed all of us. Sometimes she said at the sewing machine all night on Easter, because you know Easter was a big day in the Black church. Man, everybody had on their Easter hats, their Easter dresses, and that's where I got into Mary all these years.
But of course, success comes with its challenges.
And you're talking about a roller coaster. I started with $500 in my house, letting different people come in my living room with used fixtures and I let them come in and look at hats. And then I moved to a store on the south side, on Grant Street, on Dixie Street. And I came out of my pockets. I haven't had a business loan. I work out of my pocket. As I make a little bit of money, I put something back into the shop. So it has been a roller coaster.
And those days, Mary Henson has overcome.
It's all over me, all inside me, because of my mother. Her name was Mary, and she was a beautician. So she learned all the skills in beauty school of how a woman is supposed to dress on that sewing machine all night long, making our clothes. So it's in me. It's in me. Mary's Fashions is in Mary. What I put on people, I want them to look good. Because when you look good, you feel good. Yes, ma'am. That's why I try to keep looking good.
You can shop at Mary's Fashions right here in Odessa. The store is located on East 10th Street near the intersection of Dixie and University.
We spoke with the president of the NAACP chapter of Midland, Odessa. Eddie Rabb says out of all the African American leaders throughout the years, his favorite is still Martin Luther King Jr. The NAACP stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. It's a civil rights organization that formed in 1909.
It's very important that you get involved with NAACP because we get involved with our community.
There are between 100 to 150 members of the NAACP right here in the Permian Basin.
Coming up, we'll tell you how you can learn more about Black history, and that's after the break.
If you want to learn more about the African American history and culture, a local library makes it easy.
So take a look. There are specific labels at the Ector County Library in Odessa. The labels make the books simple to find.
You can see the label is green, yellow, and red with African American written underneath. The books are spread out throughout the library.
So get out and learn more about the African American history in your community.
That's right, and thank you for joining us this afternoon as we celebrate Black history.
You can read the stories we brought to you more in depth on our website, yourbasin.com.